This is my true story. 15 years ago, I buried my only son with my own hands. I stood by the grave as they lowered the box, listening to the sound of earth covering everything I loved. Since that day, I've lived my life between silence and sorrow. Every Sunday, I visited his grave, cleaned the stone, changed the flowers, and spoke to him like he could still hear me. People forgot him. I never did. But one afternoon, as I was lighting a candle by his grave, I looked up and saw him walking past the cemetery gate. Before I continue, tell me, if you buried your child and then saw them alive years later, what would you believe? A miracle or a nightmare? Please subscribe so you don't miss what happened next. For 15 years, my life moved in circles, small, quiet, predictable circles that began and ended at the same place. My son's grave. Every Sunday morning, before the church bells rang, I would walk down the narrow dirt path that led to the cemetery. My knees ached, my hands trembled, but nothing could stop me. I carried the same things each time: a bunch of white lilies, a small rag to clean the stone, and a brass lighter for the single candle I always lit beside his name. It became a ritual, not out of habit, but out of love. The grass never stopped growing around his stone. Seasons came and went, snow, rain, and sun. But I kept the ground neat, the flowers fresh. I spoke to him while I worked, telling him about the weather, the neighbors, and the aches in my bones. Sometimes I imagined he was listening. Sometimes in the wind, I thought I heard him answer. Those small illusions were all I had left. People say time heals. They lie. Time doesn't heal. It only teaches you how to hide your pain better. Every mark on that stone, I knew by heart. The carved letters of his name had begun to fade, worn down by the touch of my fingers and the years of rain. I'd trace them with my thumb, as if rewriting his memory into the world again. I couldn't let him disappear, not from the earth, not from me. The caretakers came and went. Some would stop and nod. They knew me by now. They called me the old man with the lilies. They didn't know his name, but they knew my devotion. In their eyes, I saw pity, that quiet kind that people give to those who never move on. I didn't mind. They didn't understand what it means to lose your child. They didn't understand that a father's grief doesn't end when the world says it should. There were years I forgot my own birthday, but never forgot his. I kept his favorite sweets in my pocket, even though he'd never eat them again. I cleaned the marble with the same cloth I used the day he was buried. It was worn, torn at the edges, but I couldn't throw it away. It felt like an old friend, like a bridge to him. Sometimes I would see other families visiting nearby graves, wives, mothers, children. They came for a season, then vanished again. But I stayed. 15 years of tending that small patch of earth taught me one thing: the dead don't leave us. We carry them in our bones. I talked to him more than I talked to the living. I told him how I missed his laughter, how the house stayed too quiet without his voice. I asked if he was proud of me for keeping his resting place beautiful. I asked if he forgave me for not saving him that night, the night he never came home. 15 years of rain and sun carved a path from my door to his grave. Every footstep wore deeper into the dirt, a trail of love, loss, and memory. It was all I had left, until the day that path led me to something I never thought I'd see again. The truth is, I didn't live in the present anymore. I lived in memories, in small echoes of the boy he once was. Every corner of my house carried him. His shoes still sat by the door, covered in dust. His old jacket hung behind mine, the sleeves stiff from time. Even his toothbrush, untouched for 15 years, still leaned against the edge of the sink. People told me I was mad to keep those things, but they didn't understand. When you lose a child, every object becomes a heartbeat. Every smell, every shadow becomes a piece of them refusing to die. I remembered his laugh, loud and reckless. I remembered his shoes thudding up the stairs, his voice calling, "Dad, I'm home." I remembered the smell of his hair after school, the way he'd fall asleep with the TV still on. I remembered too much. Maybe that's why I never healed, because healing means forgetting, and I wasn't ready to let go. Sometimes I'd sit in his room for hours, talking to the air as if he were sitting on the bed. I'd tell him about the news, about the neighbors, about the way my heart ached each morning when I woke up alone. I'd say his name just to hear it out loud, to remind myself that it once belonged to someone real. The silence that followed was always heavy, but I preferred it to nothingness. The grave became an extension of that room, a place where I could speak without feeling foolish. I would polish the stone until it shone like glass, whisper his name, and close my eyes. In my mind, I could see him smiling again, young and bright, with that stubborn spark in his eyes. I imagined him saying, "I'm fine, Dad. Don't worry," and I would nod, even though tears blurred everything around me. Neighbors would pass by and tell me I should move on. "He wouldn't want you to live like this," they'd say kindly. But they didn't see what I saw when I closed my eyes. They didn't feel what I felt when the wind brushed against me, gentle and cold, like a hand I once held. They thought grief was a season. For me, it had become weather, permanent, shifting, but always there. I lived in that space between life and memory. The world outside moved on, new roads, new faces, new years. But inside me, everything was frozen in the same moment, the day they told me he was gone. His laughter still echoed in my dreams, and sometimes I'd wake up smiling, thinking I'd hear him in the kitchen. But there was only silence. The past had become my only home, and I lived there willingly. Until one afternoon, when the air changed. It was small at first, the kind of feeling that crawls under your skin before your mind catches up. Something in the world shifted, and for the first time in 15 years, I felt the present knocking on my door. That morning started like any other. I woke before sunrise, boiled water for tea, and wrapped the lilies in brown paper. The air was cold enough to sting my fingers, but I didn't mind. I had walked that same path so many times that my body knew it better than thought. The cemetery waited beyond the fields, quiet, still, familiar. But that day, something felt different before I even reached the gate. The wind carried no sound, no birds, no rustle of leaves. Just silence, a kind that pressed against my ears and made me feel like the world was holding its breath. I paused at the gate and looked around. The sky was gray but not stormy. The clouds hung low, almost touching the trees. Even the grass looked dull, the color drained out as if the morning itself didn't want to wake. I brushed it off as my imagination. When you visit the dead long enough, sometimes you start hearing things that aren't there, or noticing when things that should be there go missing. I made my way to his grave, the sound of my shoes crunching softly against the gravel. The air was colder than usual, sharp against my skin. My breath came out in white clouds. When I reached his stone, I kneeled down slowly, as I always did. My joints cracked, my knees protested, but I didn't care. I brushed off the fallen leaves, trimmed the small weeds growing near the base, and set the flowers in the metal vase. Then I took out the candle, the same kind I'd been lighting for 15 years, and struck the lighter. The flame flickered weakly, refusing to stay still. I cupped my hand around it, whispering, "Come on, boy. Let's get this one to stay." It was the same thing I said every week, a small ritual between me and the wind. But this time, the flame went out. Not once, not twice, but 3 times in a row. That's when I noticed it. The air shifted, the back of my neck prickled. It felt like someone was behind me, not close, but watching. I turned my head, slowly, half expecting to see a caretaker or a passing visitor. But there was no one, only rows of stones stretching into the fog. Still, something in me stirred, a voice I couldn't explain. "Look up," it whispered. My heart began to beat faster, heavy and uneven. I hesitated, staring at the candle, at his name carved into the stone. Then I lifted my eyes toward the path near the gate. There, in the distance, was a figure. A man walking slowly along the outer fence. His head was down, hands buried in his coat pockets. The way he moved, it stopped my breath. The rhythm of his steps, the tilt of his shoulders. Familiar, painfully familiar. For 15 years I had dreamed of him walking toward me, but now I was sure, That man was walking away. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I blinked hard, wiped the fog from my glasses, and looked again. But he was still there. The man walking just beyond the cemetery gate. His shoulders hunched slightly forward, hands in his coat pockets, head bent the same way my son used to walk when he was deep in thought. My heart began to hammer in my chest, loud enough that I could hear it in my ears. I whispered his name without meaning to, as if saying it might turn him around. He didn't. He just kept walking, slow and steady, like a memory refusing to fade. My knees locked where I knelt. Every part of me wanted to move, to stand, to run toward him. But something stronger held me still. I felt both terrified and alive, like I was staring through the thin wall that separates the living from the dead. For 15 years, I had spoken to a grave. And now, my son, or someone wearing his face, was walking on the other side of the gate. I tried to reason with myself. It's a stranger, just a man passing by. But the more I looked, the less sense that made. His gait was identical, the same uneven rhythm from the old football injury he got when he was 16. Even from a distance, I could see the slight limp on his left leg. I had watched that walk every day of his life. I knew it, like I knew my own breath. The air around me grew colder. The candle beside his grave went out completely. The flowers in my hand trembled. I stood up slowly, my balance unsteady, my heart racing faster than it had in years. The man reached the gate, paused for a moment, then adjusted his coat and turned down the road that led out toward the village. The world felt suddenly too bright, too sharp. I looked down at the gravestone, at his name carved deep into the marble, the dates that marked his birth and death, and my stomach turned. How can a dead man cast a shadow? I took a step toward the path, my voice shaking as I called again. "Son!" No answer. Only the crunch of gravel under his shoes as he disappeared around the bend. I stumbled forward, gripping the fence for support. My body felt weak, but my mind refused to accept what I had just seen. I pressed my hands against the cold iron bars of the gate and stared down the empty road, hoping he would turn back. He didn't. It felt like the world had cracked in two, one half holding the grave I'd tended for 15 years, and the other holding the man who wasn't supposed to exist anymore. My breath came short, shallow. My legs began to shake. I whispered to the wind, to the earth, to the stone itself. If that wasn't him, then who did I bury? I don't know how long I stood there at the gate, gripping the cold iron with both hands. My breath came in small bursts, the kind that come when the body forgets how to breathe. My mind said it couldn't be real. My heart said it was. The man had turned the corner by then, but something inside me, some ancient instinct, told me to follow. My feet moved on their own, slow at first, then faster. The path was uneven, stones jutting out from the frost, but I didn't care. For 15 years I had walked that same road to speak to a grave. Now, I was walking it to chase a ghost that had skin and a heartbeat. When I reached the bend, he was there, standing by the old willow tree near the outer wall, the one that leaned just enough to cast its shadow across the cemetery fence at noon. He wasn't moving, just standing still, looking out toward the fields. I could see the side of his face now, the jawline, the curve of his neck, the way his hair curled behind his ear. My throat went dry. "Son," I whispered again, too softly for him to hear. He turned. Just a little at first. Enough for the light to catch his cheek, his nose, his mouth. And then his eyes. The same gray-blue eyes I'd seen in the mirror every morning of my life. My body went numb, my knees buckled, but I didn't fall. I just stood there, staring. It was him. Not someone who looked like him. Not a dream, not a memory, not a trick of light. It was my son. Older, thinner, with lines on his face that hadn't been there before, but still him, down to the small scar above his right eyebrow. The same one he got when he fell off his bike at age 9. I had held him that day, pressed a cloth to the cut, told him it would fade. It hadn't. Neither had he. The air between us was silent. He looked at me, really looked. And for a moment I saw something flicker in his expression. Recognition, fear, guilt. Maybe all three. His lips parted like he wanted to speak, but no sound came out. My mouth opened, but the words wouldn't form. What do you say to the dead when they come back? I wanted to run to him, to hold him, to ask why. But my body wouldn't move. My hands trembled against the fence. Then, as suddenly as he had turned, he looked away. He pulled his coat tighter, lowered his head, and walked off down the road, not running, but fast enough that I knew he didn't want to be seen again. I didn't chase him. I couldn't. I just stood there, watching until he disappeared into the mist. My hands clutched the air where his name used to be carved in stone, and I felt something in me break. Not from grief this time, but from confusion so deep it swallowed everything else. If that was my son, then the man buried under his name was someone else. For a long time, I couldn't move. The world had gone completely still. No wind, no sound, just the fading echo of my heartbeat pounding in my ears. The flowers I'd been holding slipped from my hands and fell onto the dirt, petals scattering across the frost. The candle at the grave, half melted and forgotten, flickered weakly once more before the wind finally snuffed it out. Everything around me felt heavy, unreal, like the air itself didn't know what to do with what I'd just seen. I wanted to believe it was grief playing tricks on me. 15 years of loss can make a man see ghosts where there are none. That's what I told myself as I stood there shaking, staring down the road where he had vanished. But ghosts don't leave footprints in the mud, and his did. Deep, fresh, unmistakably real. I bent down, pressing my hand to one of the footprints. The ground was still warm where his boot had been. My throat tightened. I whispered his name again, this time not in disbelief, but in desperate prayer. Please, if you're real, turn around. No one answered. Only the creak of the gate behind me, swaying slightly in the wind. My mind began to claw for explanations. Maybe I was losing my mind. Maybe someone else had survived who looked like him. Maybe, and this thought hit me hardest, maybe he'd never died at all. But that was impossible. I was there. I had seen the body. I had signed the papers. I had lowered the flowers into the open earth myself. I remembered the smell of rain that day, the way my hands trembled as the coffin disappeared beneath the dirt. The sound of the priest's voice, the way my legs almost gave out when they said, "May he rest in peace." How could I have buried him if he was still alive? My head felt light. I staggered backward, gripping the iron fence for balance. The world tilted, the sky spinning above me. I pressed my palm to my chest, feeling my heart thud unevenly. The line between reality and memory blurred until I couldn't tell which one I was standing in. The wind picked up, carrying dead leaves down the path. For a moment, I thought I heard footsteps again. Soft, steady, like someone circling back. I turned sharply, but there was no one there. Only the whisper of air through the trees. I picked up the fallen flowers with trembling hands and placed them back on his grave. My voice was small, almost childlike. "If that wasn't you," I whispered, "why do you walk the way he did? Why do you look through me the way he used to?" The grave didn't answer. The candle was out. The earth was still. But deep down, I knew what I had seen wasn't a ghost. It wasn't madness or illusion. It was real, painfully, impossibly real. And as I stood there, surrounded by silence, one terrible thought began to grow inside me. If my son was alive, then who had I buried beneath his name? I don't remember making the decision to follow him. My body just moved, driven by something deeper than thought, something primal, desperate. My legs felt weak, but my heart pulled me forward. The cold air bit at my cheeks as I left the cemetery behind, the gate creaking shut behind me like a whisper warning me not to go. But I couldn't stop. I had spent 15 years visiting a grave. I had earned the right to know the truth. The road beyond the cemetery was narrow, lined with tall trees that leaned in like they were listening. Frost covered the grass on either side, crunching under my boots. The man, my son, or whoever he was, had turned down the path toward the old bridge that crossed the river. I could see faint footprints in the frozen dirt, leading the way. They were heavy, clear, spaced just like his. I followed them with my hand brushing the fence for balance, whispering his name over and over under my breath like a prayer or maybe a curse. At every turn I expected to see him, to find him waiting, to hear him explain everything. But each corner led to another empty stretch of road. The mist grew thicker the farther I walked. It curled around my feet, rising in slow, white waves, swallowing the distance between the living and the impossible. My breath came in gasps, my knees burned. But still I went on. By the time I reached the bridge, the sky had turned silver gray. The river below whispered softly, cold and endless. And there, in the middle of the bridge, I saw him again. Just a silhouette now, blurred by mist, but I'd know that shape anywhere. The slouched shoulders, the way he leaned slightly to his left side when he walked. My son, my boy, my ghost made flesh. "Wait!" I shouted, my voice breaking the stillness like a cracked bell. He didn't stop, didn't even look back. I tried again, louder. "Son!" For a moment I thought he hesitated. His pace slowed, his head tilted slightly. But then he kept walking, faster now, almost running. Panic shot through me. I stumbled forward, grabbing the icy rail for balance, but my legs refused to obey. I was too old, too slow, too late. By the time I reached the middle of the bridge, he was gone. The road ahead was empty, blanketed in fog. Only the sound of the river remained, steady and cruel. I stood there, gasping, my hands trembling against the rail. My eyes searched the mist, but there was nothing. Just silence, and the faint outline of his footprints fading into frost. I turned back slowly, each step heavier than the last. The world felt colder now, emptier. The only proof that any of it had happened were the marks he left behind. Footprints too real to deny, too human to explain. When I reached the cemetery gate again, I looked back one last time. The mist had swallowed the path completely. No sign of him, no sign of anyone. Only one question echoed in my head. Had my son come back to see me? Or had he come back to see if I still believed he was dead? That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my old chair by the window, the candlelight trembling on the table beside me, staring at nothing. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. The world outside was silent, but inside my head, everything was screaming. I kept seeing him, the way he turned his head, the scar above his brow, the way he disappeared into the mist. I told myself again and again that it couldn't be real, that I was losing my mind. But madness can't leave footprints. Madness doesn't wear your son's face. When the morning came, I didn't go to the cemetery. I went to the attic. Dust filled the air like memory turned to ash. Boxes stacked high along the walls, untouched since the funeral. I hadn't opened them in years, not since the day I packed them away to stop myself from breaking down every time I saw his name. But now I needed answers. The first box held old photographs, him as a child, grinning, covered in mud from the riverbank. Another showed him in his school uniform, hair too long, eyes full of mischief. I touched the edges, tracing his face with a trembling finger. "If you're alive," I whispered, "where have you been?" In the next box, I found the documents. I had kept everything. The death certificate, the coroner's report, even the faded newspaper clipping about the tragic accident. My breath grew shallow as I spread them across the table. The pages looked different now, unfamiliar, like I was seeing them for the first time. I read them slowly, line by line, every word sinking like ice into my chest. The report said drowning. The body was unrecognizable. Identification was based on personal items found nearby. My hands froze. Personal items, it said. Not DNA, not fingerprints, not certainty. Just a wallet and a watch. My son's watch, the same one I'd given him for his 18th birthday. The same one that had been found on the body. But watches can be lost. Wallets can be stolen. I felt my heart pounding against my ribs as I flipped through the pages again, searching for something I had missed all those years ago. The coroner's name, unfamiliar. The signatures, rushed, almost illegible. I leaned closer. My own name, where I had signed for release of the body, looked shaky, blurred by tears that had fallen the day I buried him. For 15 years, I had believed what they told me, because belief was easier than doubt. Grief had blinded me to the small cracks in the story. But now, the cracks were opening wide, swallowing everything. I pulled out his photograph again, the one I had left on the headstone every year. I stared at it and whispered, "Who did I bury?" The walls felt closer now, like they were listening. I thought of the grave I had tended for half my life, the soil I watered, the name I spoke like a prayer. For the first time in 15 years, a terrible thought took root in my mind. What if the grave I tended wasn't a grave at all? What if it was a lie, built to bury the truth instead of my son? The next few days passed in a fog of obsession. I barely ate. I barely spoke. I spent hours hunched over the table, surrounded by papers that suddenly felt like strangers. The grave I had worshipped for 15 years had turned into a question I couldn't answer. The more I searched, the less the past made sense. Every date, every document, every word I had trusted began to unravel. I went to the town hall, clutching his death certificate in my shaking hand. The clerk looked at me with polite confusion when I asked for the original records. 15 years ago, she said. That's going to take some digging. I waited in silence while she disappeared into the back. My heart felt like it was beating out of rhythm, half in the past, half in the graveyard. When she returned, she held a thin file. "Strange," she murmured. "There's no copy of the autopsy attached, just a release form and a notice of identification." "Identification by what?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She flipped through the pages. "Personal effects." My stomach dropped. No DNA, no dental records, just a wallet, just a watch, just a name someone assumed belonged to the body they found by the river. I thanked her quietly and left, though the ground felt uneven beneath my feet. I walked home through streets that suddenly looked unfamiliar, like the whole town had shifted a few inches to the left while I wasn't looking. Everything I'd believed about my son's death was crumbling. That night I couldn't stay inside. I needed air, or maybe I needed ghosts. I walked down to the local tavern, a place I hadn't visited in years. The same faces were there, older now, lined by time and memory. When I ordered tea, the bartender squinted at me. "Aren't you the old man who visits the cemetery every week?" I nodded slowly. "Yes. My son's grave." He hesitated, then leaned closer. "You might not want to hear this," he said quietly, "but there's been talk." For years my hands tightened around the glass. "What kind of talk?" He looked around, making sure no one else was listening. "A man showed up a few towns over about 10 years back. Same age your boy would be now. No ID, no past. Kept to himself, worked odd jobs, paid cash for everything. People say he walks with a limp, same as your boy had, right?" My mouth went dry. "You've seen him?" He shook his head. "Just heard stories. Some say he's trouble. Some say he's running from something." The room spun slightly, the noise fading to a dull hum. I stood up, my knees weak, and left without finishing my drink. The cold night hit me like a slap. If it was him, if it truly was, then what had happened 15 years ago? A staged death? A mistake? Or something worse? The questions came like waves, each one harder to stand against. I walked home with my heart hammering in my chest, the world around me dim and distant. That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I realized something horrifying. I had spent 15 years keeping my son's memory alive. But maybe he had spent those same 15 years making sure I never found the truth. I still go to the cemetery, every Sunday, just as I always did. Habit, or maybe hope. I can't tell the difference anymore. The path feels shorter now, though maybe it's just because I've walked it too many times to count. The lilies are harder to hold. My hands aren't as strong as they used to be, but I carry them anyway. I still clean the stone, still trim the grass, still light the candle, even though I no longer know who, or what, lies beneath that earth. The name carved into the marble is still my son's. I run my fingers over each letter, tracing them like the lines of a map that no longer leads anywhere. Once, I used to talk to him there, tell him about my week, about the weather, about how lonely the house had become. Now I don't speak as much. I just watch. I watch the gate. I watch the road beyond it. I watch for movement, for footsteps, for the shadow that might return. Sometimes I imagine he'll appear again, walking the same way as before, hands in his pockets, head low, like nothing happened. I tell myself that if I ever see him again, I'll call out, and this time he won't walk away. He'll stop. He'll turn. He'll tell me where he's been, why he vanished, why he let me grieve for 15 long years. But deep down, I know I'll never get those answers. Some truths are too twisted to survive the light. There are nights when I sit by the grave long after the sun goes down. The candle burns low, the cold creeps into my bones, and I feel like the whole cemetery is holding its breath with me. I close my eyes and listen to the wind moving through the trees, and sometimes, only sometimes, I swear I hear footsteps again. Slow, careful, familiar. They stop just behind me, close enough to stir the hairs on the back of my neck. I never turn around. I can't. Maybe it's him, maybe it's memory, maybe it's something caught between both. The priest once told me the dead rest easy when the living let go. But how can I let go when I don't even know which world my son belongs to? The grave feels both full and empty. The earth feels honest, but the truth doesn't. I've stopped asking questions now. I've stopped chasing shadows. I just tend to the grave as I always have. But when I light the candle and the flame trembles against the wind, I always whisper the same words. If you're out there, come home. And for a second, in the flicker of that flame, I think I see movement by the gate. A shape, a shadow, a reminder that not every ghost lives underground. Final thought. I took care of my son's grave for 15 years. Then I saw him walk past me, alive, or something worse.